strip away everything you avoid, everything you refuse, everything you would never do, what's left is not your character. It's your fear wearing your face. You think you know yourself. You have a story about who you are, your values, your preferences, the things that make you, you. But that story has a hole in it, a hole shaped exactly like everything you refuse to look at. Here is something no one tells you about fear. It does not announce itself. It does not say, "I am fear." It says, "I am taste." It says, "I am preference." It says, "I am principle." And you believe it every single time. Think about the last time you said, "That is just not me." Maybe it was a version of yourself you glimpsed for one terrifying second before you shut it down. You called it a boundary. You called it knowing yourself. But here is the question you never asked. How do you know the difference between not wanting something and being afraid of it? The honest answer is, you do not. Not because you are stupid, but because fear is smarter than you are. It learned your voice before you learned to speak. It memorized your face before you knew you had one. By the time you were old enough to recognize it, it was already wearing your skin. Consider how a person builds a life. You would assume they move toward what they want. But watch closer. Watch the decisions that do not look like decisions. Watch the paths not taken because they were never seriously considered. That is where the architecture lives. Not in what you chose, but in what you never let yourself choose. There is a simple test for this. Ask yourself what you would do if you knew you could not fail. Then ask yourself why you are not doing it. The gap between those two answers is not circumstance. The gap is fear disguised as reason. And reason is the most effective disguise fear has ever invented. Here is how it works. Fear arrives first, in the body, before any thought forms. A tightening in the chest, a contraction in the gut, a sudden stillness in the limbs. Then the mind wakes up and asks, "What just happened?" And this is where it gets clever. The mind cannot say, "I am scared," so it says, "I am smart." It says, "I have thought about this carefully, and the answer is no." But the body knew the answer before the mind started calculating. The calculation was never a search for truth. It was a search for permission. Permission to obey the fear without admitting the fear existed. Now think about how many decisions you have made this way. Not one or two, but hundreds, maybe thousands. Every city you did not move to. Every skill you did not learn because you were not naturally good at it. Stack them up and you have something that looks like a life, but it is not a life you chose. It is the life left over after fear took its cut. Which brings us to the part that should disturb you. Fear does not just shape what you do, it shapes who you become. Every time you avoid something, you train yourself. You train yourself to be the kind of person who avoids that thing. And then you believe that is just who you are. But it is not who you are. It is who you made yourself become to avoid feeling afraid. There is a difference between those two things that most people never notice, because noticing it would mean looking at the fear directly, and looking at the fear directly is exactly what the fear taught you never to do. So, let us look at it. Fear of failure is the obvious one. It masquerades as patience, as perfectionism, as waiting for the right moment. But the right moment never comes, because the fear keeps moving the goalposts. Fear of success is less obvious. It masquerades as humility, as not wanting attention, as being comfortable where you are. But what it really fears is that success will change the game entirely, that people will expect more, that stakes will rise, that there will be further to fall. Fear of being seen is perhaps the deepest. It masquerades as privacy, as being a private person, as not needing external validation. But the terror underneath is that if people really saw you, they would not like what they found. And so you build walls and call them boundaries. You build distance and call it independence. You build armor and call it personality. Fear of rejection shapes entire personalities. Some people become so agreeable they disappear. They mold themselves to every room they enter until there is no shape left that is their own. Others become so defended they reject people before they can be rejected. Now, here is what makes this especially hard to see. Fear-based decisions often work. Avoidance keeps you safe. And so you tell yourself this is wisdom. You tell yourself this is maturity. You have learned from fear. And fear is a teacher that never wants you to graduate. The most disturbing part is how this compounds over time. Every avoided experience removes a possible future. Every declined opportunity closes doors that would have opened other doors. The life you are living is just one branch of an infinite tree of possibilities. And fear has been the gardener, pruning everything it did not approve of. Think about the relationships in your life right now. This feels like harmony, but it is actually stagnation. Two fears keeping each other company. Think about your career, your vocation, the way you spend your days. Did you choose this work, or did you end up here because other options felt too risky? Is this a calling or a compromise? Is this what you wanted, or what fear allowed you to have? The tragedy is not that people make fear-based choices. The tragedy is that people forget they made a choice at all. They mistake the cage for the world. They mistake the walls for the horizon. They say this is just how life is, when what they mean is this is just how fear made it. But there is something even more uncomfortable to consider. What if fear did not just limit your choices? What if fear shaped the very way you think about yourself? What if those categories were drawn by fear's hand? You believe you are bad at public speaking because you have always been bad at it. But you have always been bad at it because you always approached it terrified. You believe you are not creative because you have never produced anything creative. But you have never produced anything creative because creating meant risking judgment. You believe you are not good with people because interactions exhaust you. But interactions exhaust you because you spend every moment managing fear instead of connecting. The identity you have built is not neutral observation. It is a conclusion drawn from contaminated evidence. Fear touched everything before you measured it. So who would you be without fear? Not without caution. Caution can be chosen. Not without prudence. Prudence can be chosen. But without the fear that chooses for you before you even know there was a choice. That question has an answer, and the answer is the truest description of who you actually are. Not who you have been, but who you would be if you stopped running. That person exists. They have always existed. They are just buried under everything you built to stay safe. This is not a comfortable realization. It means that every time you avoided something, you betrayed that person. Every time you chose comfort over growth, you abandoned them. Every time you said that is just not me, you buried them a little deeper. And the worst part is, they know. They show up in the quiet moments, in the 3 a.m. thoughts you cannot escape. That envy is not about them. It is about the version of you they remind you of, the one you keep locked away. So, what do you do with this? The answer is not to eliminate fear, because you cannot. Fear is built into the architecture of being human. It kept your ancestors alive long enough to become your ancestors. The answer is to see fear for what it is, not a reliable advisor, but a frightened child with a megaphone. Not a wise protector, but an alarm system that cannot tell the difference between a burglar and a house cat. Once you see that, something shifts. You can still feel the fear without obeying it. You can acknowledge it without letting it drive. You can say, "I hear you," and then do the thing anyway. This is not about being fearless. Fearless people do not exist outside of movies. This is about being honest enough to call the fear by its name, and then choosing differently. The question is not whether you will feel afraid. You will. The question is whether you will let that fear write your story, or just be a character in it. Every day you wake up and make this choice without realizing you are making it. Every conversation, every opportunity, every moment of potential connection. A choice. A choice between living as yourself or living as your fear's creation. And here is what nobody tells you about that choice. It compounds in both directions. Every time you choose fear, the next choice becomes harder. Not because the fear goes away, but because you prove you can survive it. And every time you survive it, fear loses a little of its power. You are not going to wake up one day without fear, but you might wake up one day and realize fear is no longer in charge. That it is there, but it is not driving. That it speaks, but you do not always listen. That is what it means to become who you actually are. Not to become fearless, but to become free. Free to want what you want, instead of only what feels safe to want. Free to try what calls to you, instead of only what you know you can do. Free to love without holding back, to create without permission, to live without constant negotiation with your own terror. That freedom has a cost. The cost is discomfort, vulnerability, the possibility of failure and rejection and pain. But the cost of not paying that price is higher. It is a life half-lived, a self half-known, a story that ends with the question, what if? And that is the cruelest ending of all. The person you could have been is still in there, waiting to see if you will ever let them out.